Hi, and welcome back to AATV Live. I'm your host, Tom Anvil Hibberd, on this beautiful sunny... No, hang on a minute. It's pissing down with rain outside. There you go. So how's the weather with you wherever you are? So normal kind of caveats apply to our live streams. I'm in the workshop. There may be noises, there may be distractions. I may get attacked by a greyhound wanting a cuddle and all that kind of stuff. So today we're going to be talking kind of first principles about teching and basic maintenance on specifically your AEGs, and we'll probably touch on gas blowbacks at some point. Now, I've been doing my own teching for a while, but I am no means a professional or an expert. My guest has written about teching and has done lots of teching and has taken lots of photos of bits of GNUs himself, but he was also not a professional tech. So we're not going to go into the intricacies, but what we want to talk about is kind of the principles and some basic mechanical properties and what kind of do's and don'ts about doing some tech. So I'd introduce you to probably who's actually technically my co-host these days, Mr. Ben Webb. How you doing, Mr. Ben Webb?
All good, buddy. How are you getting on?
I'm
enjoying the evening.
I'm quite nervous actually. I've not done one of these for a while, so I'm feeling a bit of a quiver.
It's been a bit of a while. I think when the world started to get back to normal, we all had to go back and do normal stuff, and everybody else did as well. So
yeah,
it was fun doing a few live streams.
When I was doing one a week,
nice to be back.
Got a bit more confident, but now I'm a bit more like, oh, I don't know what's going on. I had to try and remember to do all the settings and all of that kind of stuff. Who's joining us in the comments? Alex P, Matt Lincoln, Theo Scott. Hoping for a lab coat. It's a bit niche. Grey Jedi.
There's other channels for that sort of stuff.
Yeah, do you want that kind of stuff? So Ben, I'm going to ask you the standard question on AATV Live, which is, what's in your cup tonight?
It's not a very adventurous evening, to be honest. I'm just getting through some excess punk IPA that's been in the fridge a couple of days.
It's one
of those things that gets picked up at the weekend.
It's not a bad play. It's not a bad excess to have, though, is it? It's not like our good friend Gareth Gadge Harvey, who's currently drinking Foster's. Gadge,
poor guy.
We're not
very along in a minute.
Not very impressed about, but there you go. I'm back on the Innocent Gun, the original.
Nice.
Which is very, very, very tasty, bourbon barrel aged Scottish ale, which I'm quite enjoying. And there's indeed a dog staring at me through the garden room door, but I'm not going to let him in because there's cameras and tripods and wires and lights everywhere. But like,
stuff not to lie on.
Everything to shut down. Alex says, no need to be nervous, you're amongst friends. Thanks, Alex. Once I get going, I'm all right. But honestly, the intro is always I'm always a bit nervous, and my partner will tell you every time I do a live stream, I pretty much want to quit for about an hour beforehand. Right. But once I get chitty chatting with Ben or whoever's on, generally it's all right. But thanks for your support. I really appreciate it.
You're all right.
Right, Ben. We kind of came up with this. We've been wanting to do this for a while. Now, what we're not going to be doing is kind of a techie teardown of guns on the table. So I do have an overhead camera, so I can show you some bits. But what we want to talk really about is a kind of the wider principles of teching, home teching, when you should use a tech, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. So I think you wanted to start off kind of on a premise of how they actually work, because I think a lot of people don't, to a certain extent, don't even understand how an AEG even propels the BB down the barrel in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a bit of a scary science kind of thing that, if you're into tech work, you dismiss it and you forget about how daunting it was to start with. You look at a gun, and if it makes a horrible grinding noise, you give it to somebody that you regard as pretty much magical. They take it away and then bring it back out, and it works again, and it might even work better than it did before. But it's not that technical. But unless you are sort of technically minded, you probably won't find it as enjoyable as some people that are really into tech work do. Some people do it as a hobby in itself. It's as much of a thing to do as actually shooting guns, actually tuning them up. But I think it's good to start from the very beginning, because it's super easy just to completely forget. People start from scratch, and then you end up flying into acronyms like ARL, AR latch, spur gear, angle of engagement, all that kind of stuff. And people go, oh, okay, this is an impenetrable wall of stuff that I'm never going to be able to get on with, and they just kind of feel so daunted that they never get on with it.
Yeah.
And actually, I've said before on the channel, back in the day, I was terrified of breaking my gun because I thought, I've spent all this money on a gun, and if I break it, I'm going to have to give it to the tech, and they're going to end up giving me a bill for 80, 90 quid to get it working again. And as soon as I delved into it and confronted my fear of guns, I actually felt that I enjoyed using them a little bit more, because I knew if something went wrong, it's probably going to be a £10 fix if I'm willing to get my Allen keys out. So
yeah. Did you?
where
So
I kind of like to start.
I started working on guns before YouTube. So it was lots of stage by stages photographs on forums.
Oh, yes.
If you were lucky, there was no freely available YouTube video source.
Oh, yeah.
These days it's a lot simpler, although some sources can be trusted more than other sources. I would always suggest that you watch several videos on a given subject, and in life, in fact. If you wanted to learn about something, watch several different sources and then come to your own conclusions. But also with tech work, some people have one way of doing it, some people have another way of doing it. Some people are deliberately trolling their audience as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's opinion based in the fact as well, and it's mixed in. There's more than one way to skin a cat. Certain ways do work better than others, and you've got to be realistic about what you expect from things. I think you should work out what you actually want to achieve by delving into tech work, and bear that in mind when you go ahead. Are you going to build the equivalent of a Formula One car out of your airsoft gun, or do you more closely need like a 4x4 that will deal with anything and be able to be abused? Because you can build a gun that will perform on the edge, but it won't be durable necessarily, and it will probably be quite fragile in terms of. And when I say fragile, I don't mean like you fall over and it will snap. I mean, a BB jam may well write it off, and one failure might be utterly catastrophic because you'll break 4 or 5 very expensive parts. So, the basic principles of airsoft guns, and I guess we'll start with AEGs, won't we? AEGs being the most proliferate kind of gun. They work on a motor that turns some gears. One of the gears is half bowled. It pulls back a piston, and that piston moves inside a cylinder. And as I was saying on Facebook on my status the other day, it kind of just zoots some air down a barrel, and along with that goes the BB that's fed into the hop unit. So they're pretty brutal machines, aren't they? They're not very elegant in terms of
the most technical
mechanisms.
What I'll just quickly do, Ben, is switch to my overhead. And we can talk about what I've got on the desk, which is half a GNU. You should be able to see that on your Skype feed from me.
Yep.
So this is the lower of a GMP, well, not really a GMP, custom build, but you can see the gearbox sticking out the top. Now this is really basics, but we want to do some very, very, very basic stuff before we move on to anything else. The motor lives in the grip. Some people ask, why can I put any old grip on? No, you need to use a specific AEG one because the motor lives in the grip, and a real grip for a real AR firearm doesn't have the gubbins that you need and doesn't mount in the same way to get the motor through.
A lot less space inside them compared to the motor grip on any gun. Actually, I don't think there are many AEG guns that
these are quite fat.
Have a real spectrum.
Actually, when I went to a gas blowback grip, I was quite surprised by how much thinner they actually were. And then so there's the motor. There's 3 gears. As Ben says, it pulls a cylinder back inside here, which gets to the end of some teeth, and it fires forward, pushes air out. This is the nozzle, and that connects into the barrel. Here's a hop-up unit. This is what puts the backspin on the BB, flies down the barrel. This is the inner barrel and comes out the end here. And this will sit, and it's in the gun, will sit thusly.
Yes.
I've done we won't do a full teardown. There's a channel called AATV, a great channel, great guy that runs it. And on that channel is a video full teardown and discussion and description on how gearbox works, and I go through what all the parts are I show you exactly how they work. I show you how they connect with each other and what a cycle of operation looks like. So if you want a really detailed explanation of how a standard gearbox works, I'd go and have a look at that video. I'll bring Ben back up.
So yeah, I mean that's the basic fundamentals of any gun. You know, you need somewhere to keep the battery, and any gun, no matter what shape it is, any AEG pretty much works on the same principle, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what version gearbox it is. In fact, a lot of people say, you know, is version 1 worse than a version 7? No, they should actually just be called layout 1 through to layout 7, because they all achieve exactly the same thing.
Well, they're pretty much
and they all work.
They're pretty much chronological, aren't they? So it's just this. Yeah. I don't know. It's just the kind of this series in which 6 came before 7. It's literally as simple as that.
Yeah. So we've got a couple of questions on YouTube already.
Okay, I shall bring which one do you want? Theo. Okay, Theo. Theo asks,
does anyone have a guide on how to change my nylon bushings over to metal? Hold on a little bit, because we wanted to talk about things like that in a while, and maybe you'll find that you don't want to do that, or it's not necessarily the best thing to do. So do hang around for a little bit, and we'll let you know. Changing bushings is literally a case of taking everything apart and replacing them. So although it's not a complicated job, it does require you to strip everything right down. You can't do it from the outside. And then we've got the Delta Hotel Airsoft question. Brilliant. Would you recommend getting a standalone, ready-to-run gearbox to start tech on instead of your primary? I wouldn't necessarily recommend getting a loose gearbox, although that's not going to be bad, but I would definitely recommend getting something other than the gun that you will rely on using, because you don't want to be sitting there in the middle of the night before game day, surrounded by tiny screwdrivers and trying to find a little spring. Yeah, we've all been there. We've all tried to do it in a rush, and it's not.
I remember one of my teammates at Sennybridge 2004 for a weekender trying to put his classic Army M15A4 back together and firing the spring guide across the room and basically waking some very angry man up in his sleeping bag. He got beamed on the forehead by someone's spring guide. Yeah.
So like I know we're probably breaking the script a little bit, but number one job when you're going to be doing tech work is have a proper space and a proper amount of time set aside before you even start to do anything. If you haven't got a sturdy table surface that's flat and solid, and it hasn't got like your Nan's Ming vase next to it, or it's not got some sort of French polish on the wood or something like that, you need a good workbench and some light and plenty of time to start delving into things. I've seen so many people, I started taking this gun apart and the spring's flying across my room. Like, I started doing it on my bed. Don't do that. You're going to have a bad time. You're going to cost yourself money. Do it properly, even if it means clearing off the kitchen table and putting a towel on it and getting a work mat on stuff. That's the best thing to do.
Give yourself time. I think give yourself the time to finish the job as well, because you can get halfway through and then dinner needs to be served, or the kids need to play, or someone needs to do the homework, or the dogs have come in, and suddenly you've got half a gearbox and some tiny parts, and you end up having to plastic bag everything and then lose track of where you are. It can be a complete nightmare.
It's not a spectator sport, is it?
And then you get really stressed when someone's watching you. A couple of interesting other questions, which we'll probably come on to later, but I want to kind of take them off. I think Eagle 6 is in the chat, which is great. Thanks, Rich. Thanks for joining us. Personally, I learnt on not boneyard guns, but I kind of got the cheapest possible thing that was as equivalent to my primary that I possibly could. Sometimes that's not possible. If you're running a Marui, you don't really want a cheap Marui. It doesn't exist. But if you're running a basic, it's kind of partly why. If you're going to be interested in teching, I'd recommend not buying something particularly expensive in the first place as a primary, because then you run the risk of wrecking it in the first place. I've got a 90 quid Spectre in the kitchen, and I run a lot of quite expensive GMPs, but the operating principles are exactly the same. So that 80, 90 quid Spectre or a second-hand gun that works. I think there's a good point Rich from Eagle 6 made, which was about if you get a boneyard gun, there could be something missing or it's already not working. So getting something cheap, second hand that you know works, or getting a really cheap, low cost gun might be a nice way of doing it.
Indeed, yeah. Low cost being the point.
Low risk. Yes, low risk, and low cost is relative. Low cost is always going to be relative to your income. But it's
the more functions. Sorry, Tom. The more functions a gun has, the more complicated it's generally going to be. So I would recommend, like you say, the £90 Spectre, bog standard, classic army, anything like that. That's just a simple gun. Tech work gets a hell of a lot harder when you start putting electronics in guns as well, because then you run the risk of not just mechanical failure, but messing around with electronic parts. They're generally not as resistant to abuse as a gear and a piston and a spring. When you start messing around with things that have like resistances and fragile PCBs and things like that, you're going to have a bad time. You get it wrong and it doesn't just not work. You get it wrong, you plug it in and it sets on fire, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Josh Hemingway brings up a point which I had on my list to talk about, but let's do it now because it's a good one. Tools. So if you're going to start teching, Ben, are there any tools that you would recommend yourself?
Good Allen keys. A good set of Allen keys is pretty much essential. You will probably need metric Allen keys. That's like millimeters. But some American guns may use Imperial Allen keys, and jamming an Imperial Allen key into or jamming a metric Allen key into an Imperial sort of socket is not cool. You end up stripping things out, or you find that you can't undo a bolt or a nut or something like that. So you probably will want a good set of metric Allen keys, and you'll also want a basic selection of Imperial Allen keys. I think it's like really small ones that you'll need in most cases. So get those. I recommend getting, well, if you're really going to get into it, get some T-handled fellas, the really long ones with the moulded handles on, because in some instances you do need quite a long Allen key to get things out, but in other times you have to do quite a lot of repetitive screwing and unscrewing with airsoft guns. So comfortable Allen keys are best. Those, the rusty black Allen keys that you get on those key ring with spring things on are generally
from the garage, probably not the best idea.
If it's less than a $5 for a set, they're not going to be the one. I go for a nicer quality set than that. Treat yourself, because you will use them. I
know there was a bit of a trend for people to use power screwdrivers for a while. Don't do that either. If you do a lot of teching and you're a professional and you intimately understand how much force applies, and you've probably got fucked wrists from turning Allen keys all day, then a power screwdriver may be a good idea. But if you're just getting used to it, you really need to be able to feel what's going on, and if you're about to round it,
if you are super inside, Tom, gone.
So no, I was just going to actually. Josh has brought it up as well. Using the right tools for the job and not using a Torx on the head or a Posi on a Phillips. What I was just going to say is most airsoft fasteners are not made of great materials. They're probably not made to spec in the first place. And if you use the wrong head, or if it's slightly out of spec, or you use people say crosshead. There's about 6 different crosshead standards for a screw. And if you can use the wrong one, you can round off a screw so super right easily. Eagle 6, if it's not the right tool, stop and find the right one. There you go.
Yeah. So I was just going to go back and say, if you are doing a hell of a lot of tech work, I know the assembly lines and stuff actually use electric drivers that are plugged in, and they've got a rack across the top that you can pull down, magnetized tips, and you can just let it go and it springs out of the way. I've had the opportunity to use those to put things together, and it makes it super easy, but they've got very, very fine torque clutches in them, so you can't overset a screw, which is important because, like you say, they are easy to rip out. One thing to notice as well, a lot of airsoft guns do use that really rigid blue Loctite stuff that can make it difficult to get, like literally difficult enough that if your screwdriver or your Allen key doesn't fit perfectly, or you've not got it seated home properly, first thing that goes is the head out of the screw, and you turn an easy job into 2 hours of going to the hardware shop to get an extractor, and then realizing the extractor's probably shit and doesn't work anyway. So then you have to use a drill bit and hack out the screw, and then you realize that you can't find another one that's quite the right size, and it just turns an easy job into hell on earth. So absolutely going to say it again, get the right tools. Another good thing to get the right tools for: screwdrivers of all sizes and shapes. You probably will need flatheads and posi to get things done. And you're actually probably looking closer to watchmakers' tools than you are to big hefty things that you'd use on a push bike or something. So you do need quite fine tools compared, but you also do need a couple of fairly hefty tools. Probably the best thing to go for if you're going to get a set is get the long posi drive, sort of large screwdriver, especially if you've got ARs, because that screw inside the buffer tube of ARs is the one that, even to this day, I sometimes realise that I haven't got a screwdriver long enough to get that bloody thing out. I think you're going to get your tech spear out.
I've got this one here, right, which is used to have a load of rubber here, which I cut off so I can get it down a buffer tube without pinching the.
It needs to be done. That is,
and then this old big boy here.
Oh yeah. So I think the buffer tube. Everybody's probably familiar with the buffer tube on the back of an AR type gun. Deep down at the base of that buffer tube, there is a screw inside that holds the whole thing to the back of the receiver. Underneath that cap, the rear cap, deep in there is a screw, and you need to take that screw out to get into the innards of the gun. So it's got to go right in the middle there and engage that screw. I mean, some manufacturers are really nice, and they'll actually use a dual head screw that you can use both a flathead and a posi on, when push comes to shove. But if you can't get that screw out, you're pretty much stuck doing anything with the gearbox. That's definitely a critical area that you need there. Where else were we talking?
Right.
Tools. What do I use most?
Yeah. What do you use most?
What sort of work I'm doing with?
Armourer's wrench. Ben's gone quiet. Is he back? He's back.
Sorry, I lost you for a second.
That's right.
I'm back.
I've got a gas blowback now, so I did buy an actual armourer's wrench, but not necessarily for an AR, because you don't need to go talking down on things quite as much. But if you're going to do any gas blowback work, actually it's just useful, to be fair. If you work on an AR, get an AR armourer's wrench.
They come with a really nice cutout that you can get flash hiders off with, because I find flash hiders are sometimes bonded on pretty well. But always watch out for that grub screw on flash hiders as well. Rich, Eagle 6 Airsoft will know how many recoil guns have you ever come across that somebody's just wrenched the flash hider off and absolutely annihilated the threads on the end of the barrel.
Yeah.
And those barrels aren't particularly cheap to replace
and then they
rethread.
Then they go off to Jim at LC Fix It to get rethreaded.
Inserted. Yeah, that's another thing actually. One thing to mention, aside from tools, nothing on an airsoft gun generally requires that much elbow grease. If it requires that much elbow grease, stop and look closer at the exploded diagram and see if you're going the right way about it, because there are a couple of things that require some serious cranking, but very rarely do you come across them. Cranking stuff out, they're not real guns. They're not made of steel. They're not made to withstand that kind of force, and leverage on that will cause something to bend or snap, and you will probably ruin more things than you started with.
Eagle 6 says, yeah, absolutely. So many requests for outer barrels.
Yeah. So we've got covered tools mostly. Allen keys, screwdrivers, work mat. Get those bits sorted out before you even start delving into guns. Be prepared to spend a bit of cash on them. Don't use Christmas cracker crap, and away you go. So we were going to get back onto the kind of script that we were going to talk about, weren't we?
Yeah. So key areas,
the basic anatomy of the gun.
Almost. So we're going to look at kind of key areas to target, but I think as part of that, we want to talk about a few things, because I'm just laughing because and Ben will laugh. Eagle 6 have said like when someone knocks out the rear receiver pin on a TM recoil.
So a bit of context for that, if anybody else is watching, is TM recoils look a lot like.
Oh, carry on going. I'm just going to grab a gun. If Ben's gonna, I lost him again. Ben,
So
he's back.
I've dropped out again.
You're
Sorry,
back.
I was just saying the TM recoil with the quirks.
Yeah.
They look a lot like a normal gun, but they're not. There's a couple of bits that are slightly different, and if you go hell for leather trying to knock bits out of them, you'll end up ruining something, and it's usually quite an expensive thing. So make sure you know what it is that you're working on before you go investigating the insides of it. Be prepared.
You can be led astray watching real firearm videos as well.
Oh yeah, especially things like using brass brushes to clean out barrels and things like that. They don't need that. That's one of the basic tech and maintenance. One maintenance tip: you never need to put a brass rod down any kind of airsoft barrel at all. I think we've covered this off before, haven't we?
Yeah, I've done it before. Let's go on to. So we're going to talk about key areas to target, but I think what we want to talk about before we get into that is what to expect from your gun in the first place, and what you should do with it before you even decide to open it. So, because for a certain extent, is there anything wrong with it at all in the first place, unless you just want to go in there because you're a boy and boys are stupid and that's what we do? Or do you think it's not performing in a way that suits you? And I think I wanted to just do a quick bit about what to expect from a standard airsoft gun before people get. So you hear a lot of stuff about they can shoot 100 meters, they can hit, they can shoot the gnats chuff off at 70 and all this sort of stuff. A stock UK spec airsoft gun will shoot 50 to 55 meters. That's actual meters, not airsoft meters. It will be effective at about 35 to 40 meters. Now, we've always defined 35 to 40 meters as having a 50% chance of hitting a torso-sized target. So if you put 2 BBs in the air, 2 or 3 BBs in the air, you're pretty much going to hit a target. You're pretty much, as long as you can shoot straight, you're going to hit a target at 35 to 40 meters. That's actually not very far when you measure it. If you go to a flat range and measure it and get someone to stand, it's really not very far. It's like, so you shouldn't expect miracles out of airsoft guns, out of a standard airsoft gun. And even a heavily upgraded airsoft gun, so my really good ones, will do 70 meters and are probably effective out to 50 to 60 meters. And that's with quite a lot of work done on them. You can get, and then there's, like anything, there's quite a bit of difference between a stock gun and a really good gun. But in reality, it's about 20% more range, and accuracy is probably a lot better. But you shouldn't expect to be shooting 200 meters away, 100 meters away. Even making a shot with a stock gun at 50 meters is a bit dicey. And people expect way too much from them, and that's why you get people going, "Oh, I hit him," and all this nonsense at airsoft fields, because people just don't understand their guns.
I think there's the what you expect of a stock gun, and then there's also what you should prepare yourself to get in extra after spending money on upgrades.
Yeah.
What are upgrades actually going to give you? You're never going to get out with a standard gun to 100 meters. It's not going to happen.
Not in the UK.
That fabled 100 meters. You're not going to get them out there. And if you are, they're going to be taking so long to get there. You're going to have to shoot probably halfway through the first game and expect to hit the guy about near the end of the third game. You're just putting BBs in the air, basically. So no matter how much money you spend on upgrades, you are going to start on that slippery slope of diminishing returns, where you throw money at a gun and you get less and less back for the more that you throw. You can chuck heaps of money, and by the time you've finished fully upgrading something, the last upgrades will cost you a hell of a lot of money, and you will get almost negligible benefits from it. Not saying you won't get benefits from it, but once you go down that slope, it's not going to be a particularly fruitful expenditure. I mean, I've done it before. I'm not going to lie. I have just spent the money for the sake of spending the money, upgraded the gun for the sake of completeness. It's been fun. Would I do it as a matter of course? No, of course not. But I'd do it as a learning exercise, and just so I could say that I'd done it. Like that thing that you're peeping through, Tom. If the next upgrades you were to put in that were, silver wiring or pure gold connectors or something like that, you're not going to get much out of it, but they're probably going to cost you a lot of money.
There's not much left to do to
But
that.
for the sake of completeness.
But it's
you can't replace many things that it already came with. We spoke a while ago about upgrade parts and option parts, didn't we?
Yeah.
And a lot of parts that people choose to put in their gun are an optional swap for something. They're not necessarily always an upgrade. But, so when it comes to waffling like a good in there, but when it comes to upgrading your gun, be prepared to. You're not going to turn it into something that punches holes in plate metal at 50 meters. You're still going to be shooting the same BB. I mean, probably one of the most critical upgrades is buying good ammo. Like we've always said from day one, every time I've been on this channel, we've probably ended up talking about buying quality BBs, and that is an upgrade in itself.
I think it's the single best thing you can do is buy quality ammo from
bang for buck.
I use ASG. There are numerous brands out there that have quality ammo. The other thing I will always say is test. Get together with your mates, buy a bottle of something different each, and just see what works for you. Different guns like different ammo. I've sat alongside next to Phil, and the ammo that Phil Bucknell, that Phil's gun likes is different to the ammo that my gun likes. And that's
different mags, like different ammo, things like that.
Yeah, they feed differently. Different hop units like different ammo because they feed in a different way. Different nozzles pick up different ammo differently. So my every single group range test we've ever done has always ended with just buy some stuff from a reputable manufacturer and just test it and see what works for you, because that will get you better ammo without doing anything. Brilliant. You'll get better range. You'll get a slightly better range. You'll get slightly better accuracy, probably significantly better accuracy, and it's a lot cheaper than putting random parts into your GNU.
Well, Dan from ATRG on YouTube has just said it's a fair amount of placebo effect, and that's absolutely true. You spend a lot of money on a gun, and your expectation of it is incredibly high, and then you realise you're not really getting that much practically out.
Well, that was kind of
shooting BBs.
One of that was going to be my next point, Ben, which was about what are you expecting? What are you expecting to get from these upgrades? Have you benchmarked it in the first place? So how do you know it's better?
What are you comparing to?
What you can, if you can't,
exactly.
Is it anecdotal, as ATRG says? There's a placebo effect. You put a load of parts in, and you go, "Oh, it must be better." Or I've bought this bottle of BBs. They feel better than those ones. How do you know? Have you consistently shown? Go on.
I've known people to throw money like crazy at guns, and I just dropped a beer.
Sorry.
Beer delivery. People throw hell of a lot of money at guns, heaps of cash, and I've actually known them to work worse, because all of these third-party bits that you've bought, even though somebody on an internet forum might be telling you that these third-party bits are the best, generally the most expensive selection you can put together, they might not all work together. I mean, there's no assurance that every single phalanx all actually works harmoniously together in your gun. There's no certificate of that's definitely going to happen. Some parts aren't totally compatible with each other. It's not a given. So you do need to understand why you were putting them in the first place. So aside from actual BB slinging efficiency, performance-wise, I find I upgrade a lot of guns because I want a certain feel. I want it to feel quick. I want it to feel responsive, and I want it to not sound like a bag of nails, basically. There are a couple of my sort of upgrade option justifications. They're the goals that I want to achieve. So primarily, I just want to pull a trigger, and I want the gun to shoot, and I want that space, because I almost exclusively use electric guns, AEGs, apart from pistols. I expect the response from the trigger. I don't want it to go like zip and fire a BB out like it's winding up. I actually want it to be very zippy, like a lot of the guns that you'll hear that Tom's tested. I want it to be quick and rapid, and you can do that by putting a bigger voltage battery in. That's step one. You put a bigger voltage 11-volt battery into any gun, and it will speed up the cycle time. However, how long it will last based on that battery is debatable. You know, some guns you'll get lucky. I pushed it very hard with a few basic stock TM recoil guns back in the day, and I pushed it hard, and I was like, I don't use much full auto, so I think I will get away with using semi-auto on this gun. So I'm putting less strain on a lot of the parts inside. I'm expecting less from the mechanisms inside, but it means the semi-auto trigger response is very quick. It makes it zippy. I guess that's the overall. Sorry.
That reminds me, Ben. Actually, I'll just ask because I know Rich is Eagle 6 in the comments. Rich, if you could just let us know what if you could name what is it your customers ask for, that would be really interesting to hear. You know, just a couple of what you know, even what's your primary kind of when they say, can you upgrade my gun? What is it they're looking for? I'd just be interested to know, anecdotally interested to know. What you were saying, Ben, reminds me of something actually on the list of things to talk about, which is we spoke about before we came live, which was about the UK market and UK import and what that does to our stock guns. Because it's quite interesting, and a lot of people don't think about this very much. Because really, the UK and its power limits is quite a small market, and that has an impact on how our guns come into the country. Would you like to expand on that a little bit, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I can probably use my experience. I don't like to really go into it and hammer it out, but I work for ASG, Action Sport Games. They're a manufacturer and distributor of guns, gun bits, BBs, and such like that. And one of the guns we do is the Evo. I mean, it's been here for a while. Will probably know of the ASG CZ Evo, which is ASG's own effort at manufacturing an AEG. And basically, when they manufactured that gun, there was no real problem in sending guns all over the world with an M120 spring in it that was pushing out, 1.4, 1.45 joules. And then all of a sudden, some legislation came into place, and it meant you couldn't even send them to countries if they were into the UK. So if it was over 1.3 joules and potentially a Section 5 firearm, let's not get into that again here because we're not talking about that. But this 1.3 joules, we generally use probably, like half a joule, quarter of a joule to half a joule less velocity, and we always have, the limits that we impose on ourselves to play at skirmish sites have always been around this. We haven't really changed them. I still am adamant that we use 1 joule at 328 FPS, and the reason people push it up to 345 to 350 is because they're just incorporating the 5% variance most places give them as a benefit of the doubt.
That's what it used to be.
People aim for 350.
Used to be 328 plus 10%.
It always is. It always is, but people just get lazy about it. But that power limit is substantially, or not even substantially, just significantly less than guns used in places like Taiwan. Stu probably tell you that they use guns that are a little bit more pokey over in Taiwan. In the US, they tend to use things that are a little bit more pokey. I'm talking to guys over in different countries. They're not blasting each other with 450 FPS full auto from 2 foot away, but they are fine using 370 in CQB. Not a huge amount more, but that means their gun is optimized. So pretty much every gun that we will buy in the UK was designed somewhere else and optimized to be run at a slightly higher power level.
Yeah.
So back to the ASG story, when that law came in 2017, they had to downgrade the spring in the guns that they sent to the UK. So to be very, very safe, they went down to M95, which was just 1 joule, just sub 1 joule. So that gun is fine to use in the UK and in Ireland, which is cool. But the motor spec in the gun is fairly powerful. Much like a lot of motors in decent guns these days, higher end guns, you get quite a lot of motor for your money. And the gear ratios and batteries, etc., mean that the gear spin pretty fast, and unless you downgrade the voltage from the battery, which dictates how quickly the motor works, you're going to get a gun whose gears spin far too quickly for the piston to return, the spring to return the piston inside the cylinder. And you get something called pre-engagement, which is generally a one-stop shop to ruining the piston in your gun, which means stripping the whole thing apart. Usually you'll find some gears are mashed up as well, and you'll have to fix everything. So that's the consequence of running a too powerful battery. And with a lighter weight spring in the gun, the battery power level, the voltage of the battery needs to be dropped down. It needs to come down correspondingly. So, in short, guns are designed and spec'd largely to work for the rest of the world, because the UK is not that big a market compared to the US or Hong Kong, for instance, or generally the East. So guns are generally have to be a little bit less powerful than optimum in the UK, and we get the thin end of the wedge because we don't have that much power in comparison. So, yeah, the UK spec guns compromise, and that means we don't usually get the best performance. One of the guys from the Lernton group found this with his Crytek, Chris Vector. Great gun, really nice quality piece of kit, as are all Crytek guns. But before they made some changes, and I'm dubious to whether the changes they made actually solved the problem, just like we have some issues with people running Evos and wanting to get good performance out of them, that snappy trigger, and not being able to use an 11.1. There are a couple of tweaks you have to do if you want that 11.1 snappiness. They found that it wasn't running quite properly, wasn't cycling really smoothly with the lower powered battery, and we suspect it's because just the motor spring balance has been upset. So something needs to be done to rectify that motor spring balance to make the most of the battery voltage. So it's a very waffly way of saying we don't get optimized guns in the UK.
No, we don't. And I remember I was watching. There's quite an interesting, it's quite long live stream that English Kiwi did, talking about the realities of, and they talked about this. That's why I wanted to bring it up, because I found it really interesting about the realities of importing and selling Rifts and replicas replicas AEGs in this country. And also the implications. I think some people would expect a retailer to sort all of that, but then if you're talking about, you're probably sorting a spring, a motor, and a hot rubber. At which point, how much are you prepared to pay for that? And we're going to get into that. We're going to get into that a bit more in a bit. But I think people have some unreasonable expectations on what they're buying, and also on the retailer to sort this stuff for them. Don't go whacking a big old. You can whack a big old battery in it, but it's probably going to go wrong. If you want if you want a really reliable GNU, put a big old 7.4 in a Tokyo Marui, leave it stock, and it'll probably run for a very, very, very long time.
Yeah.
Because it was designed for
even a big old NIM, because Marui still don't acknowledge LiPo batteries. So
it's interesting stuff from. Stuff in it's interesting stuff in the chat from Rich. I'm not going to put it all up, but it's worth, if you're on YouTube, just have a look at what Rich is saying, because it's an interesting insight from a guy that does a lot of upgrades. So the key to upgrades is understanding why you're fitting them as opposed to just fitting them. He upgraded a Crytek the other day and he wanted everything.
Yeah. But then how do you know if your hop unit isn't, what's the surefire sign that your hop unit isn't doing what it should? And I think that's a difficult one, because, do you have to max out the adjustment in order to hop a BB?
I could do a whole.
Are you able to?
I might get Bucknell on to do a whole live stream on that, on BBs and hop adjustment, and I want to film an episode on adjusting your hop, because there's several ways of doing it. I think you can adjust for max range, you can adjust for your engagement range, you can adjust for low range, you can adjust, and they all have different arcs and different flight paths and different. So it's one of those things.
Different characteristics.
But
I would think.
Sorry, Ben. What I wanted to just stress as I think some people have it not unreasonable, but I think people have expectations of how riffs or AEGs will perform in the UK, and sometimes it's a bit unreasonable based on our kind of geographics and player base and demographics and how many riffs actually enter the country.
Yeah. So there are a couple of different reasons why you'd want to upgrade again, I guess, isn't there? Yeah.
So let's go for that.
Number one probably being that you broke it. So your guns stop working. Something doesn't work right, and you're going to spend some money on it. So instead of replacing it like for like, it's an interesting thing because a lot of same thing on your car brakes. So okay, what goes in your car? You take it for an MOT, and you get a replacement part because something's gone. Say the washer jet pump is packed up, and you go for an MOT, and they say, "Oh, your washer jet pump's packed up. Do you want a new one?" But they don't say, "Do you want an upgraded washer jet pump that will pour 4,000 litres of water onto your windscreen in a minute, or do you just want a factory washer jet pump replacement?" And people usually go, "Just whack the factory one in, please."
Yeah, so I guess the question is, what
a lot of the time with airsoft guns.
What is it you're after? What is it you're trying to do? So what sort of things have you come across?
If something's broken.
So the first one, it's broken, and you want it fixed. Where do we go from there?
Yeah. You want it fixed? Are you going to spend some money on an upgrade part so it doesn't break again? Probably work out why it broke in the first place. Was it just wear and tear? Want to get longer lifespans out of the parts that you're putting in? Because parts in all guns, no matter if it's an upgrade or something like that, if you use it long enough, it's going to degrade. Like motor magnets will degrade, batteries degrade, gears will wear eventually. The bearings the gears run on will wear eventually.
If it's mechanical, it will wear.
Hot rubbers.
That's just the way.
Hot rubbers wear down. Everything will wear down, and if you can upgrade things to get more longevity. So you can swap design-wise. You can take one ratio of gears, take a sintered kind of alloy gear made out of mystery metal, or you can get a CNC steel gear. So your CNC steel gear will mechanically they'll work exactly the same, but longevity-wise, the CNC steel gear will do exactly the same for longer before something wears off of it or it crumbles into powder under stress. When factory parts are working their optimum, what do you need to upgrade? What if you're adding extra strain into a system? That's generally another reason for you needing to upgrade something. The battery's the perfect opportunity or the battery's the perfect example there. You want to run a bigger battery with more voltage to speed the whole thing up.
Yeah.
If you do that, you're going to need to upgrade a couple of other parts. You're going to probably need to upgrade the gears because there's going to be more torque going through those gears, which is going to wear them down faster, which is going to push them to failure rate a little bit faster. Your tappet plate's going to be moved more violently by these gears moving around. So you're going to need to upgrade that because that will probably be the next link in the chain that fails. And so on and so forth. The teeth on the piston will probably need upgrading because they're going to be ripped around a little bit more violently. And that is just from changing the battery.
Yep.
Change the motor, you can have exactly the same knock-on effect. Change the spring to get more power. You change your mainspring, there's more force in the system. There's more resistance on that spring. So the gears are going to have more torque going through them. The motor's going to be asked of more and more. Each of those individual little teeth is going to have more torque forced against it. And, you're not talking about huge chunks of metal acting against each other. You're talking about probably 1.5 millimetre high tooth. And in some instances,
not a lot of contact surface.
You've only got 4 or 5 meshing together, haven't you, at the most?
And they may not even be made that well, which means the engagement surfaces don't mate particularly well from engineering point of view. So if they're not made very well, you can rip teeth off pretty easily. I've got a couple of high torque motors in a couple of guns that have destroyed cheap gears because just the sheer amount of torque they put through. It was probably like a slightly dodgy BB that was being fed, which put just a bit more resistance into the system, and then that little bit more resistance
pushed to the failure point.
Just travels all the way through, and something goes.
Yeah. And it's going to happen. It will happen. So you know, when you're upgrading, you really are chasing that weak link around the gun. You know, through the mechanism, you're chasing it through. Even just the smallest thing, like running heavy BBs. If you step up from running a .2 to running a .32, that's a significantly heavier BB. It's over 50% heavier. That is going to require the gun to shoot enough air volume, enough pressure down the barrel that could potentially slow the piston. So that BB being fed into the system is actually could have a knock-on effect all the way through the gun, to cause problems. You've got to consider how you're using the gun and if it's in its comfort bandwidth, if it's being optimum. Basically, we're talking about driving your car sometimes we're talking about driving your car in second gear all the way, everywhere you go, because you're really screaming that system super hard. That's the main reason to upgrade a gun, is to push that weak link out of the system to make sure everything is equally on par to cope with the stresses that you're asking of it.
So there's stuff about Rich.
That's pretty much the.
Yeah. So another thing. So Rich came back with my question, and he said he effectively gets asked for more range and more accuracy, or max range. It's usually a broad request, and it's important sometimes to bring that request down into the realms of reality, of really what do you actually mean by max range. Which I think is a question I can answer at a longer level, but more range and more accuracy. You don't necessarily need to do. You can do most of that outside the gearbox, to be quite honest, but most people want you to tweak the power a bit. But at UK power levels, I think it's something quite interesting, and I discussed this previously, is that a lot of the upgrades we're putting into upgrades we're putting into our AEGs, and the rest of the world would be considered upgrades for DMRs. So the quality of the component, and I'm not saying, the other thing I want to point out before I go on a bit of a rant is that if you want to upgrade your gun and put really nice things into it, brilliant. It's your hobby, it's your fun, it's your money, it's your do what the hell you want. It's really, I'm not going to criticise you. I've got ridiculous amounts of money into some of mine, which is, really doesn't justify it, but I enjoy doing it. But I think sometimes you have to ask yourself why, and do you need the absolute best DMR 500 FPS DMR level gear in a 350 FPS or full auto AEG? If you don't need it, if you want it, fantastic.
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic.
You don't need any more justification other than I wanted to do it. It's a hobby. It's not it's not life and death. If you want to do it, if you want to spend a couple of hours prattling around with your gun, go for it.
People should have nice things. I'm all for people having nice things that make them happy. So Rich, again, thanks Rich for contributing. It's really helpful. It's why a BB jam or any feeding jam can be so damaging to your fast moving gearbox. If things are spinning really, 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 really fast, and something goes wrong and stops that spinning, there's going to be a load of force which has to go somewhere. Has to have that has to go somewhere.
It's catastrophic whirlwind of parts.
And his other point, I agree. Upgrading is fun. That's how he got into teching. That's how I got into it. Something to do.
Experiment.
What happens if I do this? So we've talked about range and accuracy. You can do a lot of range and accuracy. One, change your BB.
Yeah.
Helps.
Step one,
change your BB. See what that does for you. Two. You can, particularly with AR, in some guns it's a lot easier than others. In a lot of AR, Armament Rifle, M4, M16 platforms, it's super easy to get the barrel out. In some it's a lot more involved, but in ARs it's really, really very easy to get
really
to this. To get to this bit. So it's so then I've got. Again, I won't go labour it because I've got videos up, and there's a million videos up on YouTube on stuff you can do to hops to make them better, more efficient, more accurate. But that's for better range and accuracy. Certainly in an AR platform, you can make a big difference with a hop unit for not much money. Though you will end up spending quite a lot of money on really small bits of rubber.
Oh god, yeah. And find some of them are utterly useless, so they don't do anything that you wanted them to do.
And again, you have to experiment because some buckings might be too big or too small for the for
Yeah.
the.
Yeah. But again, in some instances, those will be the perfect one, but it may not be the instance that you're using. So it won't be the perfect one, and it doesn't matter if it costs £35 for a small piece of rubber that's about 15 mil long. 35 quid, and it's not the right shape thing for £35. It won't be a good upgrade. It won't be significantly different to the bit that you've already got in it.
Yeah.
So yeah, again, don't just throw money at things because they're the most expensive one, because they might not work with the bits that you've got. But unfortunately, the only way you can really find out is to try it out.
I mean, there are some
it's
good.
pretty bad, isn't it?
There are some good teching groups on Facebook and some good kind of users groups that will give you advice. The UK KWA group's really good because they'll basically tell you to leave it alone, but change the hop up because it's too hard for UK use. Yeah. And here's the 2 or 3 hop rubbers that we know work in KWAs. Great. Well, that solves that issue.
If you found a different one.
Yeah, that solves that issue quite quickly. Then again, there's TM groups and there's a very extensive Evo group and all sorts of groups that will help you. But yeah, you will end up spending amazing amounts of money on tiny little bits of rubber. Don't get me going on Farfly hop knobs.
Of course. So where were we? Where did we get?
So we're talking about reasons. I think one of the reasons you talked about was trigger response. I think that's one of the one of the main reasons I do any upgrade is for trigger response, because like you, I shoot mainly in semi-automatic, and I want to pull the trigger. I want a BB to actually do something rather than hear this. And in the firearms world, it's called lock time. We probably need a word. I don't know whether it's cycle time or something for airsoft as well. I quite like lock time. So lock time is how long it takes when you pull the trigger to when the projectile actually fires in the firearms world. Let's call it lock time in airsoft. What's the lock time to when you pull the trigger and it goes and the gearbox does the thing and a BB flies out at the end? And it's not so mad for full auto builds because people don't really care as much. But I think everyone would like a fast firing gun because it feels cool, doesn't it? You don't want to go pull the trigger and hear some noise and then something actually happens. Ben.
Yeah. So cycle speed and rate of fire, so lock time and rate of fire are actually kind of closely linked. So you'll find by upgrading the lock time of your gun, so the quicker it zips out, you will actually consequently upgrade the rate of fire of a gun. So if you switch it into full auto, you'll probably find it goes from like 13, 14 rounds a second up to 22, 25 pretty easily. And that's because you just force in more power through the system. The motor's spinning up faster, and it's completing its cycles faster. So that kind of goes hand in hand. Probably one of the coolest upgrades for guns, but also you do need to understand what you're getting into is the electronic triggers. I find electronic trigger boards actually make the gun feel significantly different in almost every gun that I've ever put one in that hasn't had one as standard. They do make things feel a lot different. They make the feel of the trigger, the actual physical trigger pull generally feels different. The length of the trigger pull is generally different, and the way the gun reacts to the trigger pull is different. It's usually a lot faster. And with more advanced trigger units like your Gate Titan and things like that, you can actually independently adjust the lock time and also the rate of fire on full auto. So it artificially introduces a pause between each cycle to bring the rate of fire down. So you can actually have an almost instantaneous lock time, but bring it down to 12 to 13 rounds a second, which is pretty impressive. But
that's exactly what I got in this one, Ben. So this one is set up for very fast semi-auto fire, but then its full auto fire is set for I think it's about 13, which is about right for the real firearm.
Yeah, but that in itself then puts quite heavy demands on the motor because it's constantly starting and stalling the motor by reversing the polarity, which then causes a hell of a lot of heat.
Motors want to spin. That thing gets hot.
You know, it causes a hell of a lot of heat. So unless your motor can cope with the heat, magnets stop being magnetic when you heat them up, and you have to get very high quality magnets to withstand this loss of magnetic force, magnetism, I think it's called. You know, you can heat a magnet up to like 100 degrees, and it then starts sloping off in terms of magnetic power. So yeah, a better motor, an upgraded motor, will have heat resistant magnets in it. Some of the better magnets on the motor actually use magnets created by very, very high end ferrous metal kind of engineering firms, and the magnets are heat resistant, so you can heat them up to over 250 C, and they still have like 90% of their magnetic force, which is pretty impressive. Because if your pistol grip has a 250 degrees C magnet inside it, you've probably got a lot of problems.
I think motor upgrades. There's two things. So I think, kind of going back to what we were talking about, I think there's two things that a UK spec AEG can really benefit from. One of them is a better motor. So I won't go into.
I say better, a more powerful motor.
More powerful. So this is a high torque. This is a high torque motor. So, and again, we're not going to go into specifics, but this is a high torque motor. It's built for applying force, not necessarily very fast, but it brings that force on in a really nice way. I won't go into models because there's 1,000,001 models out there, and you can delve into the Facebook groups. But I think it's also as a part for
it seems to change every week as well, doesn't it?
Yeah. Also, well, they and they change manufacturer, but a decent high torque motor will make a big difference. It's also not that expensive, relatively. 30, 40, 50 quid. You can get really, really nice motor. Motors are one of those parts that are bought in by manufacturers, and they're relatively expensive to buy in. So one of the first things they'll skimp on is a motor. Yeah. There's just so most motors I've pulled out of stock guns are pretty terrible. They're really not very good.
There's nearly as many components in a motor alone. If you take that whole unit, there's almost as many components in that motor as in the rest of the whole gun put together. There's a lot of fiddly little bits and pieces inside them. Yeah. And if you ever take one down completely, there's some bits in there that are, there's separate demand things like the brushes, commutator inside them and things like that. And there's like hand wound filaments inside them. What do they call it? I've forgotten the word for them. Armatures. Windings.
Yeah, you need a motor specialist. Yeah. But I think the point I want to get across is certainly on a more budget gun, and even on a high spec gun, the motor is one of the places that generally needs a bit of attention. It's just expensive, and it's expensive as an OEM part for a manufacturer to buy in, and to put a really good motor into an airsoft replica is going to cost, by the time it gets to the consumer, it's going to cost you roughly 3 times the amount that the manufacturer paid for it. It's just going to cost you a lot of money. Yeah. So that's just the realities of manufacturing things. So a high torque motor upgrade of whatever the flavour of the month is, I think, is a really sensible thing to do. You'll get better trigger response. You'll probably get higher rate of fire, but not massively. But fundamentally trigger response then behind a decent motor.
But then putting that motor straight into a gun upsets that balance, doesn't it?
It does.
So you put more motor in,
more force through the system.
Your knock-on effect will probably be that you need to upgrade your gears. So I guess there's performance upgrades and then also efficiency upgrades. So your motor will be a performance upgrade, but actually, more manufacturers actually use bearings now anyway, don't they? And I sometimes think bearings in gearbox shells. So just to explain it, to go from the basics, the gears inside the gearbox shell run on an axle, and instead of them running directly onto the gearbox shell, the axle goes all the way through the gearbox shell, there are bigger holes drilled in the gearbox shell, and bearings or bushings, plain bearings, are pressed into those holes, and that's what things run on. So for longevity and for ultimate robustness, I would generally say use a bushing or plain bearing, which is an inanimate ring that is precision machined to accept the axle and be low friction. For performance-based stuff that not actually be the most hard-wearing bearings. I mean, I don't think I'd ever consider running bearings in a gun now, unless you can fit 8mm bearings in it. 7mm at a push, but 8mm is the smallest bearing I would use in a gun. Bear in mind, these balls are tiny. We're talking about. Sorry, don't use that as a soundbite. These balls are tiny.
That's so gang. That's it. That's the done.
Bearing in mind, yeah, these little balls inside the races in the ball bearing, they're tiny. They're absolutely tiny, like less than a grain of rice. And the demands that we put on them, there's a lot of
very fast
torsional loads, off-axis loads. Yeah, going fast, getting hot, off-axis load, and it can cause the actual balls themselves to collapse, or the races that they're in to collapse. So yes, they might have less rolling resistance. They also have a lot less resistance to off-axis force and things like that. So as soon as you start, if there's a little hiccup, it might cause a catastrophic failure. And if a bearing goes, it's
another part that they buy in. And good bearings are expensive.
They are, especially that small and specialist.
They are expensive. Really good bearings at that size are expensive, and we're not talking hundreds of pounds, but we're talking proper money, right? And again, most consumers aren't prepared to pay for it. So I do some bob cycling, and I used to do time trialing and stuff.
Yeah.
And good bearings are not cheap. It's just reality.
To use the cycling analogy again, and we've always referred back to it actually every time we talked about tech stuff, but there's a guy called George French that lives in Sheffield, and he used to run a cycle company called G Sport. Not G Spot, it was G Sport. We all thought that was hilarious back in the 90s. But that was at a time when airsoft's in actually a similar phase now, where people want more performance, they want lighter weight, they want faster speeds, and they want fancier parts. And bike technology in the hubs had gone so far that they were slimming everything down to weigh as little as possible, which meant all of the components had to be smaller and lighter. And they started using these tiny, flimsy little bearings. And they were really specialist sizes and shapes. And George from Sheffield actually said, bollocks to this. The one thing I'm not going to compromise on is these decent bearings, which are the heart and soul of everything. And he just used these very, very simple, common bearings that were used in engineering applications. And because so many people use them in everything from washing machines to cars, this standardized size of bearing, you can get a really high quality one for a really low price.
I used to use
he used to whack those in, and away you went.
Yeah, used to buy SKS. Yeah,
made by a professional bearing factor, not just not made in small runs for a specialist thing. Because the smaller the run, the more expensive everything gets, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Good point again from Rich. Japanese bearings only. I think you're probably talking about EZO, but it's hard at the budget level. I mean, if someone's budget is 50 quid for repair, and you're paying 25 quid for bearings, it's quite a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah,
but that's reality.
What are you actually going to get? What are you going to get for changing the plain bearing in your gun already with a set of ball bearings for the money that they cost? Is it going to be? Is it going to change the feel of the gun? Very, very unlikely.
I think if you're building
bearings alone,
if you're building some sort of crazy, not really a scope for this podcast, mainly because I don't really know what I'm talking about, but if you're building some crazy DSG build, which is running at 35 rounds a second, and actually you're sensible about, I've just had a beer delivery. Thank you very much, Joe.
And a bottle opener.
I feel very loved.
Hey.
Very lucky man, everyone.
Beer deliveries.
But yeah, it's kind of like, where were we before I got distracted by beer deliveries? Talking about bearings. We're ranting about bearings. But I think it's one of those things. People get really excited about bearings and bushings, and I generally run bushings and everything because I don't care about I also shoot semi, and I don't care about that 0.02 milliseconds, and I don't care about that extra round a second that I'm missing out on. I'd rather not have a catastrophic failure and lose my 50 quid gears because the bearings shat itself.
Would what did we say before we started when we were doing our pre-stream quick natter, or the lengthy pre-show organisation conversation that we had, the planning that went into it. But no, we said basically you can either build a Formula One car that will go like a bat out of hell at the slightest out of its comfort zone. You hit a patch of gravel on the road and the suspension fails and bits will fall off of it. But it will go like a bat out of hell in optimum conditions. I would personally rather buy the Land Rover version of it upgraded, because what I want is things that are easy to fix, cheap enough to fix if something does go wrong, and it probably won't go wrong if I push it out of its comfort zone. You know, I want it to be hardy, so I'm looking for, within reason, I want decent performance, but I also want longevity. I don't want fragileness. And often with ultimate performance, the whole thing just gets a little bit fragile and fussy. You know, it becomes very pretty as a piece of equipment, and won't work optimally out of its comfort zone.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think we've kind of stressed it all the way through this. Is what is it you're looking for? What is it you're trying to achieve? I think it's important to define what you actually want out of this upgrade, build, maintenance thing that you're kind of looking for. So let's move on to we talked about tech work in general. I'm sure some tech.
Sorry, just before if I'm getting poor sound, it's probably because my microphone has wandered off of its catchment zone and I'm shouting into the distance. So hopefully you can hear me a little bit better if I calm down a little bit.
Yeah, I'm hard. Ben's coming in via Skype. So Ben's quality is always good. Ben is being compressed quite heavily anyway as he comes in. I've got a decent mic and I'm hardwired into the internet, so I'm going to sound a lot better than Ben no matter what we do, unless Ben was in the same room. It's kind of the nature of live streaming with guests. Yeah, we can come in. Well, we can maybe do
it like a radio chat one day.
Yeah, we'll sit in the old studio is now a sofa, so we can sit on the sofa and just do a chitty chat. It'd be nice. So let's talk about tech work, because I think it's quite. We also did that in our pre-chat ramble. So whilst you can do it yourself, if you're going to pay for someone to do the work for you, I think we had a good chat earlier about the expectations of that, and any techs in the comments can help us out with this. I think sometimes people have some unreasonable expectations from techs and what they're prepared to pay for. Would you like to?
Yeah, I'll go with that. So, if you think about it, and let's be really fair on our retailers and techs. You know, techs and retailers often go hand in hand, and you know, you might start off doing some tech work and then move into slightly more retail, or you might start as a retailer and then realise that people want bits fitted that they've bought from you. But people don't do it for free. You know, very rarely is anybody in the game for charity, and I don't think it's fair to ask anybody to be in the game for charity. I mean, I've done a bit of tech work for free for people, and this would probably be a bit of a learning point in the whole stream. If you do something for free for somebody, it gets a little bit awkward sometimes, you know, because you could do something for free for someone and mess it up a little bit, not be optimum, but then that person goes away and uses their gun and it breaks and costs you a little bit of money, and you've kind of got no recourse. You know, you can't really complain at somebody that did it for free for you. And likewise, you know, if it's not your priority, I mean, I've got to be honest, my good friend Dave, that also lives in Nottingham, he gave me his Garda custom build C8 7 years ago to upgrade and to fix up and fit some upgrades in. It wasn't actually working at the time. I've had his gun, and I'm not going to lie, I've had it for 7 years. It's moved house with me 4 times, and I still haven't got it back to him. Because every time I've tried to do something, I've needed to get hold of another part, and or I've fitted it and it's not worked quite right. I got to the point where I nearly gave Dave his gun back last week, and I went to use it, and it locked up. And when I was stripping it down, I accidentally stripped out the fire selector. So I've got to fit another fire selector to it now before it can go back to Dave. But the moral of the story is, unless this is somebody doing this professionally or with plenty of time to do it, sometimes it doesn't go particularly well. So back on point, having this retail outfit or doing this professionally, not for charity, you're going to want to make a little bit for you out of the back of it. So if you've got a shop and you're using electricity and you've got to keep the door open and the heating's on, it's going to cost you every couple of hours that you're doing that. It's going to mound up, and you've got bills, and stuff's getting bad. Stuff's getting expensive, sorry. And you're also going to want a little bit for you on the side for when you're finished. So every hour you might want a little bit of cash, per hour. So it's not really unreasonable for somebody in a dedicated shop that's paying rent and rates and needs all that to want maybe 20, 25 quid an hour, maybe even more than that, depending on how expensive it is to run their operation. You've got to then factor in postage and things like that. You've got to factor in not everything going smoothly. So sometimes you put an upgrade part in a gun and it doesn't work the first time. You have to take it apart again, adjust something, put it back together again. So optimum time, that might take 25 minutes to do, half an hour to do. Realistic time, that might take 2 hours to do, because you might have to go through the process several times, fit, adjust, test, retweak. So really and truly, a professional tech will probably be wanting a fair amount of money from you. It's probably going to cost more in labour than it is going to cost in the actual parts that you've bought to put in the gun, because man hours are expensive. And people don't want to do it for free. They need to eat and stuff like that. So, how much should you pay for an actual tech? I'll let you decide. I will let you decide if you're willing to pay that, or if you're willing to learn yourself. Or, I'm not going to say anyone's right or wrong for charging what they're charging. I think I've never actually seen that many techs out there that I would say, oh, that's a complete rip-off. They obviously either value their time a lot, and they're within their rights to do it, or they're very thorough, and they need to charge for the worst case scenario.
I'm going to raise my normal point when it comes to this point in the conversation, Ben, which is about the polishers.
Okie dokie.
And on Instagram, it's become very fashionable for certain techs to show lots of polishing, right, of parts. Now, polishing contact surfaces, I can, to a certain extent, I can see the point of, right? Polishing non-contact surfaces where parts don't wear because it looks pretty in photographs on Instagram is not cool, guys. Not cool, right? Just stop it. Because, right, I can see it straight away, and it happens all the time on Instagram, and I know who you are, and I'm getting really fed up with it. And at some point, I'm going to start calling people out, because it's just bullshit. If you're going to polish a thing where things actually contact each other. If you're going to polish bits where things don't contact each other, you're ripping your customers off, quite frankly, right? Get over it. Stop doing it. It's just bullshit. Right, man, moving on.
Fair enough. No, if you're paying, can I have my gun aesthetically polished in places that I can't see it? I guess that's fair enough. However, know what you're getting into. Don't be sold snake oil, I guess.
Just move on. Move. But there is legitimately a reason to polish certain bits of a gearbox. Absolutely, where things move on each other. Yeah. When you're polishing stuff which has no contact, it's like it's just nice.
So yeah, that's a segue into the bit that we probably wanted to talk about originally. Was how are you paying for upgrade work, like custom fancy work? Or are you just paying for like maintenance work? Are you paying to make something run again? Are you paying to get a feature like a battery connector changed, or the wiring extended, or something like that, or just to patch over a bit of wiring? And I do see quite a lot of beef online with people calling out other techs, or passive aggressively calling out other techs, and just saying, it's Phil. Yeah, but there's a lot of people like, you don't really need to call people out. Like, the person that's had that work done has probably gone into the tech, and this is what I was getting at with the prices. They've gone in and gone, I've got 50 quid to get this gun done. And you've gone, right, so there's a wiring nick there, or you've pinched the wiring. What I can do is I can cut that nick out, splice it over, and whap a bit of shrink wrap over the top of it, it's not going to be the prettiest fix. It's not optimum, but it's not going to have a massively negative effect on that gun. It's going to get your gun back up in a serviceable fashion, and it's not going to cost you, 70 quid. It's going to cost you £25 because I'm just going to do the quick, easy maintenance job on it. Just because of the nick in the wiring, you don't need to replace all of the wiring in that gun. You can just patch it up. So, you'll see another tech, he'll pull all the parts out of the gun and go, oh, look, some arseholes worked on this. They've fucking just patched this bit over and put a bit of shrink wrap over the top. There is a bit of shrink wrap. That's not the full way of fixing it. But it was actually just a running maintenance job. Somebody didn't want to spend 40 quid on new wiring and then 2 hours of tech time. They just wanted their gun working again for the weekend. There's a story behind all this stuff.
There's sometimes there's some bad work. Sometimes a decently done soldered joint is absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's going to have negligible effect on an electrical system. It's really not a problem. You don't, and a lot of guns don't need 16 gauge silver wiring completely rewired every time there's a tiny little problem. And as you say, if you've got a 50 quid budget to have your gun maintained, spending 50 quid on a wiring loom is just not necessary.
No, can you just whack a different connector on there for me, please? Yes, it's not going to be optimum, but it's going to cost less. Easily done. Then there's a couple of different things you could do. Again, like talking about gears and things like that. Yes, the ultimate way of replacing gears, if one goes, is to replace the whole set, because apparently they wear in and the mesh won't be even if you just replace one gear out of the set. Bit like back in the bike days, people would say you've got to replace the entire chain set and the chain if you change one ring, because they're all going to have worn differently. Yeah, just because your chain stretch doesn't mean you need to change your entire chain set every single time. It's cool to just run a different chain over your old chain set. Eventually, they will get sloppy by the time you've gone through about 4 chains.
Yeah, it's about 3 to 4
Probably
chains.
longer than that.
As long as you haven't been completely ridiculous and you have actually changed your chain. Yeah.
Yeah, you can get away with it. So, like, changing the middle gear out of your gear set because that gear's chipped its tooth, it's fine. Just whack a different gear in there. It's not the optimum way. They might not be from a matching set, but it will be okay. It will probably run fine. One thing I probably will draw the line at is sticking electrical tape around things and binding shit up in PTFE tape.
That's just not cool.
That's hack job bodges. You don't pay for somebody to put PTFE tape around something.
It's like
you pay for them to fit parts together.
I mean, the electrical tape thing. There's a difference doing a properly soldered joint on a wiring loom, and heat shrinking it, and mashing the wires together and putting some electrical tape around it.
Yeah,
that's different.
That's an expedient field fix at best, isn't it?
You need to get your gun going in the field because you've changed the battery and ripped a wire off. Then that's a different story. But you shouldn't expect that from a tech. But that's one of those things. I see I've caused carnage with the polishing comment. There you go. Just don't polish shit you don't need to. It's very simple. Guys, it's really easy. Just don't polish stuff you don't need to polish.
Understand where you're polishing.
I just don't get it.
Yeah, there's some...
Shall we do, Ben,
comments,
Ben, shall we do AOE, just because it is a thing?
AOE?
Do we even want to go? Okay. Do we even want to go with AOE? Which
it's really, really bad. No, angle of engagement is a very particular term. And it actually means the angle at which the pickup tooth on your piston engages with the tooth on the piston. Some people like to have the gear basically space the piston to the point where they hit dead flat and then start pulling things back. What it can do. Sorry, go on, Tom.
A properly designed gear is designed not to hit dead flat.
And some pistons are actually designed with the material in mind to deflect slightly when the gear hits them, to absorb a little bit of that impact.
I'm not saying all airsoft gears are properly designed, and I'm certainly not saying all airsoft piston teeth are properly designed. However, a properly designed gear train doesn't hit dead flat. That's not the way it works. But there you go.
Yeah. So I think the only real reason to start monkeying around with the AOE is when you're really, really changing a lot of parts for specific parts, maybe like cushion piston heads and things like that. And you will want to readjust the AOE, the angle of engagement. Basically, it just means making the piston shorter or longer, doesn't it? That's pretty much how it works. I've only ever paid specific detail to it where there's been a problem where I've had to, because of a very thick piston head, in a DSG build actually, very thick piston head has required me to adjust a couple of the teeth on the piston to stop them from catching, so there's no pre-engagement on those teeth. It's like AOE is touted as something that's like, oh, mystical dark art. If you don't know how to reset AOE, you're going to build a shit gearbox. Genuinely, unless it's catching, you just run the whole gear through its cycle in a dry run, and it's going to be okay. You can find if it's not going to work properly because it will snag at the wrong point, and that will cause problems. It's a bit like shimming. A lot is made of shimming. Shimming's not something that you should go blindly about, but then again, it's not also the dark art that people make it out to be. It's literally just taking up slack in the gears and making sure that the gears mesh together. It doesn't require people to get micrometers out and measure tiny bits. You can do it by feel and a little fine screwdriver, a little bit of a dibber, and just trial and error basically. You don't even need to have to measure anything really to be able to shim something properly. I'm probably saying this from like a position that your average person, first time they open a gearbox, wire all these washers on these gears. Yeah, if you take them all off, it's going to fucking fall apart before long. They are there for a reason. However, it's not a dark art to replace them. You just have to know what you're looking for. Probably do a whole video on shimming, and it would probably take us 20 to 25 minutes start to end. Not that long.
There are many videos on shimming, and there are several methods on shimming, and I think it's largely grossly exaggerated. Particularly when you're, I think if you if you're doing a sensible middle of the road UK spec, UK power level gun, which isn't shooting 35 rounds a second, as long as it's not badly shimmed, and as long as the AOE is okay, it really doesn't matter. If you're building some, as you talked about before, if you're building some F1 Ferrari super high spec turbo death gun, where if a little thing goes wrong, other things go wrong very quickly, I think it does matter. It potentially does matter at that point. But for most of us, as long as things don't catch, it really, as you spoke about, I really don't think it matters that much. I have never AOE corrected in 20 years.
Over shimming is probably worse than under shimming, because it actually causes the gearbox to lock up. I would have thought probably a good test would be if you've got your gears in and they spin freely, and they don't catch on each other, and you can see the teeth meshing. If you screw a couple of screws into that gearbox shell and pick it up and shake it, and it doesn't sound like a maraca, it's probably going to be all right. It will run okay.
I don't think
it might not be the
I don't think the tolerances. I honestly don't think the tolerances in a lot of airsoft gearboxes and a lot of airsoft really. By the time you put it in a gear, by the time you put it in the gun and screwed it in and put a load of pins in, everything's bloody moved anyway. So there is a certain. Fine. There is a certain level of. It's just a rant. This is just us rant. We've turned into a bit of a rant session.
I know.
Eagle 6 is disagreeing on shimming. I think it's. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm saying it's massively overplayed, and I'm saying that people get vastly overexcited on it. I know you've built a lot more guns than me, Rich. And I also disagree on your polishing, which you said earlier, where you said, it really pisses me off, so I'm going to talk about it. Polishing gearbox is not about polishing, it's about the attention to detail and demonstrating that. Why are you charging your customers to do a service which is pointless? And I'm not saying you're doing that, but if you are, that's not on, mate. That's just not on. That's shit. Honestly, that's shit. You're charging your customers for a service which is not needed. And I really hope you're not doing that, because it really pisses me off. Right?
If somebody open-handedly comes and says, "Can you polish the inside of my gearbox for me?"
Whatever, it's fine.
But it's going to take some time. That will be on your bill. It probably won't achieve anything.
If you want to not charge your customer for it, fine. Do it how you want. Really doesn't matter. If you're charging, if I'm not saying Rich particularly, but if a tech is charging a customer to polish a non-contact surface in a gearbox, That's just bollocks. It's just bollocks, straight up bollocks. I'm fed up with it. I'm fed up with it, and I'm fed up with the mudslinging between UK techs about this stuff. One tech opens a gearbox and slags off another tech open. I'm just fed up with it. Just sort your shit out, guys. It's pathetic, honestly.
Tom's laid it down. He's gone full bore with it.
No, I'm done with it. I'm
something you're passionate about.
No, it's not. It's not even that, Ben. I'm on Instagram, right? And I see various techs slagging off other various techs for doing poor work or not doing this and doing this. But why charge a customer why charge a customer to do a service which is not needed?
I think a lot of it is
I don't understand.
Trying to differentiate what you. Essentially, everybody's kind of using the same parts now. Everybody's building guns out of the same things, and there's only so much you can do to differentiate your work between somebody else's work. So and so has done this. I need to differentiate. I need to go a little bit extra to make mine separate from theirs, so people will come to me and they'll say, "Oh, I went to that guy because he did this little bit extra." It's kind of just making a bit of differentiation between one service and another service. I guess you go to so and so and get your tyres changed. One guy that's changing the tyres will clean your car for free afterwards as well, which doesn't really affect the changing of the tyres. It's just like a little bit extra that is thrown in there. But,
sorry, Rich. Sorry, Ben. Rich, I know what a contact and a non-contact surface is, mate. So let's just leave the polishing discussion, right? Because I can get really cross, and I'll probably cut this bit out of the video. But it's like, don't charge. Just don't. And I'm not saying you do it, and I'm really not, mate. Just it really grips my shit when techs are charging for a service which is not needed. Simple as that. And then making a big deal about it. Oh, look how shiny this thing is. It's no point. It's just no point. Anyway, let's move on. I'm gonna probably cut this bit out of the edit.
Where was the next bit that we were going on to? Maintenance work in guns. I think we covered that off with like there's a couple of different fixes that you can do. You might spot something that's done fairly rapidly. There's a story behind every maintenance job there is, so I really don't agree with people taking somebody else's gun apart and ripping into the work. Very rarely would you send a gun to somebody, get it back, and I wasn't really happy with that, so I'm going to send it to somebody else to have the same thing done. There's always a story to these things, and yes, the bitching and slagging off and things like that, it really doesn't wash that well. Find out the story about why something was done, because there might be more to it than face value. And understand why that was done. They might not have even paid for it, something like that. It might have been done because they wanted their gun in 2 hours' time to go and have a game somewhere else. That will be that. So yeah, I think we covered that one off. Shall we move on to maintenance of guns?
Ben's trying to pull me away from ranting. Yes, absolutely, Ben. Let's talk about maintenance.
I'm also aware that we've gone on for 90 minutes now, I think, haven't we? Hour and a half. So
yeah, let's try and sum up in the next. Let's try and finish off in the next 10 or so.
Getting on a bit.
Yeah. So maintenance of guns, which is different to upgrading guns.
Yeah. Maintenance is totally different. When you're maintaining something, you don't need to just go and take parts out. How often do you need to strip down a gun to maintain it? Not really all that often. I mean, I've seen guns that have been running for like 20 years. And that 20 years is gone by, and they've picked up the gun and shot it again, and it might have lost kind of like 10 FPS over that time. The hop might not be as efficient as it once was. The motor might not be quite as efficient as it once was, but it's lasted for a good long time, and it's not been opened and meddled with and changed and mucked about with, and it's probably shot hundreds of thousands of rounds, and it didn't need maintenance. It probably just needed the mud wiping off of it and the barrel cleaning. So in terms of maintenance, all I really believe in, unless you can hear something going wrong and breaking, and that's generally only in guns that you've pushed hard. In terms of maintenance, all you really need to do is clean the barrel once in a while. One of the very very early questions in the stream was about silicone oil on the hop. For me, why would you put oil on something that needs to provide grip. You need to remember that the hop rubber is there to provide grip as one of its functions. Secondarily, it provides an air seal, but it is supposed to grip a BB. You don't want the BB to go past the hop rubber without getting that patch of grip on there, because it'll just make it not do one of the bits that it's supposed to do. So I don't put silicone oil down any of my barrels at all. I don't put anything down barrels. I don't put alcohol down them unless it very, very much needs it. And then I'll only do it when I've completely disassembled the barrel and hop unit. And I'll get some sort of isopropyl out so it can clean any BB residue that's left inside it. But I will not do that once the gun is built, because, stuff's gone in there. Stuff goes in there. It might get inside the gearbox. It might start attacking plastics. It might start attacking rubbers. And then you're going to end up with a whole world of problems. But yeah, I don't generally think you need to delve into guns very often. If you know your gun, you can feel bits of it, or you'll probably hear bits of it grinding a little bit. And if you start to hear that, like, ooh, it's not really time, maybe it's time for an OT.
It kind of goes back to that performance benchmarking, doesn't it? So it goes back to your performance benchmarking. What is it chrono at? What range has it got? What rate of fire has it got? What's the trigger response? When that starts going, then it's time for maintenance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or you beat
a chrono is sorry, Tom. No, yeah. The chrono testing is probably the most. Yeah, like you shoot you get your gun chronoed. I mean, we should, before we go to every game, get a gun chronoed. Most sites will do it. Just make a mental note. I mean, maybe even write it down in a notebook or something like that over time. What did it chrono at today?
Just put it in your phone.
You'll be on different chronos, so you might get a lot of variation. But blast a few rounds through it, find out what it's recording, and if you see any noticeable drop off, so one day it's doing 340, next time it's doing 310. It might be time for some maintenance on that gun. You might find you've got a slightly ripped hop rubber that's letting a bit of air out. You might find a piston tooth worn, so the piston's not retracting properly. There will be surefire signs of something has gone wrong, in which case it's something that you need to do. You need to investigate that. But generally, if nothing's gone wrong, if it's been doing a consistent 330 to 350, depending on what site you've gone, that isn't reason to rip the gun apart and take everything out of it and rebuild it. I think over maintenance of guns is probably a bit of greater cause of damage than anything else. So people love ripping ICS guns apart because it's very easy to see what's going on inside them because of their split gearbox. And probably one of the biggest problems with ICS guns is them being full of lubrication that then gets fired into the barrel, which then goops down the BB as it's trying to leave the barrel. So just because you can doesn't mean you have to every time. They don't need re-greasing and re-oiling every game. I've seen people say stripping a gun down every 3,000 rounds. That's one bottle of BBs. That's excessive. You're probably going to wear all of the bits on that gun way quicker than they need to be by stripping it apart and taking it to the other gun. It's kind of traumatic for a gun, stripping it down. Like we were saying, all these little fixing and things like that.
The fasteners are really not up to that. A lot of them are self-tapping as well. They're not machine screws. So, it's...
every time they go in and out, it causes a big problem. So maintenance, in my eyes, is you need to have a reason for it. I know we all do it. We can't go to a game one weekend and we're a bit bored. I mean, the whole lockdown period was probably really hard on a lot of guns. People were probably taking things apart left and right, having a bad time putting it together again, and probably doing more harm than good by this investigative kind of maintenance that they're doing that didn't really have a need to be done. So, maintenance, less is more, little and often.
I think cleaning your barrel
cleaning,
absolutely. But you don't need to do it. It depends, doesn't it? If you notice, it's that benchmarking. If you notice an accuracy loss, fine, do it. If your FPS is dropping off, there's probably something wrong for it. If your rate of fire is dropping off with the same battery, maybe your battery's knackered. Maybe there's something more going on.
I'm being grinned at from off screen.
Oh yeah, I'm going to be nice to Rich because I shouted at him earlier. So he had a G&G the other day with a piston that physically wouldn't move inside the gearbox. Yeah, absolutely needed polishing and sanding to get the piston to move, because obviously the gearbox was a bit tight. Absolutely fine. But there is a reason, and I understand polishing. I've got polishing on my guns. I've polished the piston rails, but I've done stuff too.
If it's remedial work, it could be remedial work. It could be enhancement. You know, a lot of these parts, again, it probably goes back to what we were saying earlier on. Picking up parts doesn't necessarily mean they'll fit together.
No.
And with the chasing these parts that fit together more tightly and more efficiently, and with finer tolerances, means that a little bit of adjustment might be needed here and there to make sure those bits run together.
Yeah.
Most guns are already built with enough slack in them to not need that. So
in the most part, we're not talking about precision instruments, which is kind of where we're going with shimming. I think sometimes, I'm not saying, and I'm absolutely not saying, most stock guns I've taken apart really need a reshim. It's not a they're either really loose or they're really tight. They're generally not in the middle in a good place.
I think where the attitude towards it comes from is people feel or people are led to believe, or people will convince themselves that it's absolutely essential. Have you ever seen the stock shimming in a Tokyo Marui gun?
Yeah.
Lots of people probably don't appreciate that, but then we'll also go and parrot the idea that Tokyo Maruis are the best guns ever. And if you disturb the Tokyo Marui pixie dust, it will ruin everything. However, they're not really shimmed very accurately. Does it affect that pixie dust thing? It doesn't really, does it?
But the thing about
and they've got plastic bushes.
Shimming takes time. It takes time, and as we spoke about earlier, you pay for it, and people generally aren't prepared. You know, I would, as a 40-ish-year-old male, be happy to pay £1,000 for a completely sorted gun. Most people are not in that boat. You know.
Yeah.
I would pay I would happily pay real firearm prices for a completely sorted out. If I can just take it off the wall, it does 75 meters, sensible, you know, accurate out to 60, brilliant, absolutely fine. Very happy to pay quite a lot of money for that if it's rigid and a good replica. Most people are just not prepared to pay it, and I think people have unreasonable expectations of bits and bobs.
Totally. So, how do we wrap this up, Tom? Basic teching? Basic teching?
I think some take-home messages from me are: benchmark what you have already.
Yeah.
Have fun. Yeah. What's your max range? What's your effective range? What is your rate of fire? Rate of fire is quite easy. You can get phone apps that will do it, or a basic or a basic MOSFET. Not MOSFET. Basic chrono. But and one thing we should have pointed out right at the beginning, Ben, is if you're going to start teching, get a chrono.
Yeah. Get a polished chrono as well.
Get a what?
Polish the inside of the chrono. Get a polished chrono.
Don't get me going.
You have to polish the inside of the chrono.
But test, and as Rich has pointed out, I'm sorry for shouting at you, Rich. It's something I'm very passionate about. Testing. Test it before you do it. Before you do anything to it.
Do you remember when you did this a while back, and you were like, "I'm going to install these parts one by one to work out what they do. I'm going to work out what each one of these upgrade parts does." It's actually a pointless exercise to get a gun, rip everything out, throw new bits in it, and then go using it and saying, "Oh, this is upgraded. It's better than it was," because you don't even know what it was. No. You don't know what one of those bits achieved, and you know, if you carry on in that mindset, you're just going to start chucking money after every gun that you've ever put together, and you will literally just be burning money. You know, you could probably test that in a barrel. Like TM in a barrels are actually pretty bloody good.
Really good.
In most instances, they're actually really
most
good.
instances, I would say don't change them. I think for me, it's as Rich has pointed out, test.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have? The next thing is be very clear. If you're just titting about yourself in your own workshop and you're happy spending money, it doesn't really matter. But certainly if you are spending money with a tech, be very clear about what you want, because otherwise you don't know what you're buying, and you don't know, and it's very hard for the tech to know what is it you're interested in. I think if you want to start teching yourself, don't start teching on your primary gun that you need at the weekend.
Don't start doing that on Thursday or Friday night, because unless you've got enough spare parts around to potentially replace anything in that gun. Because, like I said a minute ago, dismantling and rebuilding guns is probably one of the most vigorous things on parts. I've probably broken as many parts building guns, taking them apart, putting them back together again, as I have using them in use. That is something you should factor in. Like I say, you need to have a contingency for certain things going wrong. It's relatively easy to break a tappet plate. It's relatively easy to lose some shims. It's relatively easy to mess up your wiring. It's relatively easy to snap those little spade connectors off on the ND motors. And that's a showstopper. Tiny component, break that off. If you've not got a spare one, it's actually a bit of a tough time to get the gun running up and easy, up and working again.
So if you want to learn, buy something cheap, whatever relatively cheap is for you. Don't start taking on your primary. You can buy second hand or buy something cheap. There are a million YouTube videos out there. I actually do recommend Eagle 6's. If you're doing Marui's, Eagle 6's videos are really good. That's what I pretty much learned.
Also, watch the damn basics as well, the super basics. There's a good few videos out there that have literally got animations of how an AEG works. And familiarise yourself with exactly every step of what goes on, how the parts are supposed to interact, and away you go. Failing's a great idea. Learn to push the limits, but you find out where those limits are, what a gun will cope with. Sometimes you'll get lucky. Sometimes you pull the trigger and it'll implode. First shot.
There is 1,000,001 videos out there. Don't rely on one. Watch 5
I would,
before you start on a project.
One of the caveats I'd say about learning on a gun is do not learn with a gun that has a MOSFET or an ECU in it.
Okay.
Because that doesn't really indicate you can bang those pretty easily. You overshim a gun and you put too much resistance through a MOSFET or something like that. Hold the trigger down and you're like, whoa, why is this jammed up? It will just melt and bits will leak out of it and you'll have a fire on your hands and the battery might burn in, things like that. That's don't always just learn to tech on. It's pretty much like learning to fix a car. Just fix a car without too much electronics in it. It's probably really hard to do nowadays, but if it's just a simple mechanical setup, you can follow what's going on a little bit more easy. Jesus, that's not good, is it?
That makes sense. Just what does each bit do? How do they interact?
Yeah.
How do they work?
Yeah.
How does it do it?
Yeah.
I think it's just first principles.
Yeah.
Before
you run.
And good tools. I think we talked about right at the beginning, and lots of questions about good tools. So I think we're pretty much to the end. If anyone's got any easy to answer questions, we're not going to go into depth right now. Please speak up in the next I know there's a 45-second lag, but so we'll wait around a couple of minutes for any simple questions. I think I've just it's kind of not complicated and complicated all at the same time, which is not a very helpful kind of thing to say.
But yeah, I'd say with maintenance, you don't have to do that all the time. People say, oh, you need to look after your gun, you need to do this. Just don't bother. Unless you know what you're actually going in to solve. You don't need to take it apart. You're only going to cause yourself more headaches by misadventure. Just chill on it. If you really need to do something, if you need to spend a bit of time with your airsoft kit because you're bored, rearrange your pouches or something like that. Prat around with them. Practice your pistol drawer or something like that. Don't take the gun apart because you're going to do some damage.
Eagle 6 asks what FPS gains can I get by polishing my chrono? At least 100 meters.
Yeah.
At least 100 meters.
Yeah, probably almost infinite. What is it? Over 9,000?
Yeah, 9,020. There is a good point. Test at each stage of building a gearbox. Don't just build it and pull the trigger. Absolutely. So as you build it up, check your shimming. Put some, as you said earlier, Ben. Put a couple of screws in. Check your shimmings. Are the gears spinning nice and freely?
Yeah. Cigarette filters for barrel cleaning. Sorry. I wanted to get that one. Cigarette filters for barrel cleaning. They do kind of work if you can get both ends of the barrel. So if you're taking the barrel out of the gun, usually I will bother. I don't like the idea of jamming them in the barrel and then shooting them out by blasting it on full auto, because you can probably catch some crap on your hot rubber or something like that. The best thing to do is literally...
They're quite abrasive as well. There's often some quite abrasive compounds in those things.
On
a brass barrel, I wouldn't bother.
I just pay, but you can't pull them in and out easy enough to get a good scrub going on. You know what you really want is, so that's a really interesting video clip there. What you want is that patch of lint-free cloth wrapped around the cleaning rod, so you can get it into the gun and you can move it in and out down the barrel a couple of times. Probably twist it around as you pull it out, and that will do a better job of cleaning the gunk out of the barrel. Cigarette filters, you'll not necessarily get enough of a cleaning action on them. They won't fit that tightly into the barrel, and kind of just shooting them out, it's a bit weird. I don't like it, because if it goes wrong, you might jam the gun up and you might cause it some damage. That's just why I wouldn't bother. That's just use a wipe. Yeah. Any more?
Any more? I think we're kind of there.
Yeah, get in there. I mean, they could always drop a comment on or something, and we'll pick it up.
If you drop a comment on the video after I've removed my rant about polishing, that'd be cool. So I'd like to say thank you for Ben for turning up and helping out here. We may do some more kind of teching maintenance stuff in general, a bit more specific. Actually, some actual pictures of us doing stuff, but obviously it's quite hard to do, and as I stressed at the beginning, neither Ben or myself are professional techs. So sometimes I'm a bit reticent about doing in detail tech videos, because I'm not a tech. I can make my own stuff. I can make my own stuff work, but I don't really want to recommend things to other people. So, but if you're really into that kind of stuff, let us know, and we can either find someone that does know what they're talking about, or if it's a basic thing, we can do it ourselves. So thanks for the comments. Thanks for sticking around, guys. Thanks, everybody. I think we're going to end the stream there before I get too pissed. And we'll see you. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.